well as with national business leaders at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in St. John, New Brunswick. So over the course of the past few days, I met with investment groups that represent over $9 trillion of assets under management, with the clear and positive message that Alberta is open for business. They were very keen to hear about our job creation tax cut that will give Alberta almost the lowest business tax rates in North America and by far the lowest in Canada. They were keen to hear about our Open for Business Act, which has brought balance back to Alberta labour legislation, as well as our Red Tape Reduction Action Plan to reduce by 1/3 the number of job-killing red tape rules that are holding down Alberta's economy, as well as our scrapping of the carbon tax and so much more, including our Royalty Guarantee Act and our new legislation that allows municipalities to provide long-term tax breaks, incentives to help create jobs here in Alberta. I also met with some of the people in the finance industry who deal with placing government bonds. These are the folks who help us to raise the money to pay for the NDP deficit, and they were very keen to hear about our plan, about the McKinnon report, and our plan to bring Alberta's finances back to balance within this term of government. So it was, I thought, a very successful trip. As I say, I think I met with over 25 of some of the world's largest equity funds, hedge funds, financial institutions, as well as key market research organizations. I participated in a roundtable partly on global energy security with the Eurasia Group. I delivered an address to the Manhattan Institute, which is one of the most highly rated think tanks in the United States, and also an address to a conference on Alberta energy investment that was organized by AltaCorp Capital, which is a subsidiary of Alberta Treasury Branches, a equity firm that effectively belongs to Albertans. And also met with folks who own and operate large refineries in the United States. And the backdrop of all of these meetings was the drone strike on the Saudi Aramco refineries that occurred 10 days ago. In a way, the timing was propitious for my visit because it underscored for those major investors that there is and should be a very serious risk premium for OPEC oil, which is what I have been saying all along, that Alberta is the most reliable, democratic major provider of energy on the face of the earth, and I think that became a whole lot more attractive as a message and a reality in the hours in advance of my visit to New York City. So I did find continued interest from these firms in investing in Alberta. Many of them have a long history of having done so, but to be honest with you, many of them flagged a concern about the prospective re-election of the Trudeau government and what that would imply for certainty in pipeline construction and major energy infrastructure. So they were also concerned about curtailment and the impact that has on being able to make capital investment to produce more energy. And I gave them an update on our ongoing discussion with Alberta energy producers on a possible arrangement to exempt additional barrels of crude produced from curtailment if they are guaranteed shipment by rail. And as you know, we are in ongoing conversations on that. So very productive. I learned a lot about the issues that are top of mind for these major investors. And why was I spending this time? Well, because the economic doldrums through which we've been living here in Alberta in the past 4 to 5 years have largely been fueled by a huge flight of investment, a flight of capital in the range of $100 billion, not counting the major projects that have been canceled. And that's why for years I campaigned on the urgency of restoring investor confidence as a key part of our government's job creation strategy. This will not be the last of my visits to the United States, but you can expect to see me down there much more often. That's also why I flew to Michigan and Ohio met with leaders in the American energy industry in Toledo, Ohio, which is a center of refining activity. I visited the Husky BP joint venture refinery at Toledo, which is near another Husky refinery. And in that refinery, I visited the vast majority of their the oil that they import comes from Alberta. Part of that supply comes through a very important pipeline, Line 5, operated by the great Alberta company Enbridge, which comes down through Michigan to Ohio and to Sarnia, Ontario. It delivers 540,000 barrels a day of light Canadian crude from our conventional basin, and it is hugely important to our economy. I mean, it's represents about 15% of our production. And it fuels the economy of Southern Ontario and much of the upper Midwest in the United States. However, there is a Liberal Democrat activist attorney general in Michigan who is trying to decommission that pipeline, which would be devastating to her own state's economy and to Canada, even though Enbridge has a proposal to bury the pipeline under the lake to remove any environmental risk. And so a large part of my visit was to highlight that and to meet with local political and industry leaders to underscore the importance of that reliable and safe pipeline. That's also why I met with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine in Columbus, and I appreciated his strong support. It's also why Premier Doug Ford of Ontario came and joined us at meetings in Columbus. I also spoke to a NAFTA competitiveness conference called NASCO in Columbus, met with business leaders and investors and political leaders in that city. Again, just to show how important the American market is to us, our trade, bilateral trade with the state of Ohio, is about $9.2 billion a year. By comparison, our entire trade exports to Mexico is about $1.2 billion, and to Brazil, $100 million. So if Ohio were a country, our trade would be higher with that one country than with every country on earth, with the exception of the United States. That's why you'll be seeing a whole lot more of me traveling to the United States, I hope in the months to come, to do a trade mission to Houston, Dallas, and Austin, Texas, to the American West Coast, to San Francisco, to tell the great story about the emerging tech sector here in Alberta and other Midwest states. So we'll be placing a great emphasis on these relationships. Finally, I finished out the week in St. John, New Brunswick, as a keynote speaker to the annual general meeting of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. It was great to see Alberta delegates all decked out in I Support Canadian Energy T-shirts, and I guess they wouldn't be allowed as visitors in Parliament Hill, but a lot of other delegates from across the country were proud to show their solidarity with Alberta as a reliable producer of energy. And in that address, I focused on our Open for Business strategy, inviting businesses from across the country to relocate operations here in Alberta. I also talked about the importance of getting pipelines built and how relevant that is in this federal election. And finally, made an important announcement about Alberta continuing leadership for free trade in Canada. I announced that we are eliminating a further 8 exceptions filed by Alberta under the Canada Free Trade Agreement. During the NDP's tenure, Alberta had the 3rd highest number of exceptions in Canada under the Free Trade Agreement, and now we have by far the lowest number of exceptions. We've gone from 27 to only 6 exceptions. We are narrowing 2 of those 6, and we're aggressively studying whether we can eliminate more. That might require statutory changes. Some of these things are fairly complex, but what it shows the country is the scale of ambition that we must have if we are going to achieve the dream of confederation of Canada as an economic union. And why is this in our strategic interests, our economic interests? Well, partly because Canadians lose as much as $130 billion a year because of interprovincial trade barriers, and also our whole argument about market access, energy corridors, pipelines is partly about the economic union. And so rather than spending years bickering and horse trading with other provinces, we've decided to go cold turkey, to be unilateral in our leadership, not to try to haggle about this exception and that exception, but just in the great Alberta spirit to get her done. That's what we've done by eliminating, going from 27 to 6 exceptions, narrowing to more, as well as our invitation to Central and Eastern Canadian provinces to join the New West Partnership Agreement of the 4 Western provinces, of which Alberta was an original signatory, which would be a huge advance over the Canada Free Trade Agreement. And it's also why we are seriously exploring the possibility of a unilateral Alberta recognition of professional and trade qualifications from every province of Canada. If you're a doctor and you can move from France to England and practice the next day, or from from Poland to Germany as a nurse, why can't you do the same thing if you're moving from Saskatchewan to Alberta or Ontario to Manitoba? It makes no sense. So we aren't going to allow this free trade agenda to get bogged down in never-ending haggling and horse trading and bureaucratic resistance and special interest groups trying to protect their piece of cake. We're going to go out there and as true leaders in trade. Alberta's always been a trading economy. Our jobs depend on it. We're going to lead the way to more trade. Finally, before taking your questions, I would like to announce that our government will be presenting our first budget on the 24th of October. That will be our opportunity to present our pathway to balance, to bring balance back to Alberta's finances, as we committed to do. Albertans gave us our marching orders in the largest electoral mandate in our province's history in April of this year. And a central part of that platform was to stop the dive into debt, which risks our future, which will drive up taxes, which will increase interest costs, and which will jeopardize public services. As you know, we received the report on Alberta's finances from Dr. Janice McKinnon's panel, and I want to thank Dr. McKinnon and her brilliant colleagues for that sobering advice, which underscored just how Alberta, the government of Alberta, is wasting tax dollars by overspending. As Dr. McKinnon pointed out, if we were to spend at the average per capita level across the country, we would be spending $10 billion less than we are. Instead of a $7 billion deficit, we would have a $3 billion surplus. Now, as I've always said, we can't get to the same level of efficiency of other provinces overnight. It will take years of hard work. And we will be careful and prudent about how we do this in order to protect key frontline services. I can confirm, as we committed in the budget, that there will be no reductions in the budget for the Education Department or for healthcare. To the contrary, we are making some targeted investments. For example, my major announcement about our government creating 4,000 additional spaces for addiction treatment and recovery, part of our $140 million commitment made in the platform. So there will be some small targeted investments in areas which are of critical importance, but we will be challenging the broader public sector in Alberta to try to operate at least as efficiently as British Columbia or Ontario. We will be challenging our municipalities and school boards and hospital administrators to reduce administrative costs and to get more bang for the taxpayer's buck. Because we've had a lot of the know-it-alls tell us since the McKinnon report that all we should do is just sink our hands deeper into the pockets of Albertans and tax them more. We've had people in the NDP saying, why weren't we talking about a sales tax? Funny they didn't say that in the last election. And the answer to those folks is why, in a period of prolonged economic challenge, would we make things worse by taking more hard-earned money away from taxpayers when we're operating the least efficient provincial government in Canada by a country mile? So this budget will be announced on October 24th, and it will be a credible path to bring our finances back to balance without raising taxes, but by getting more bang for the taxpayer's buck, and I'm looking forward to that. Happy to take your questions.
Premier, last week I asked you about the referendum on equalization, and you said to avert it, there would have to be a new pipeline, there would have to be regulatory changes or the end of the tanker ban, but you also added what sounded like a new condition to me, which was that there would need to be meaningful reform to the equalization system. And I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate on what you're looking for.
Well, here's my point. The whole goal of that referendum would be to get a fair deal for Alberta in the Federation on equalization. And if the federal government were to do that anyway, it would kind of obviate the need for a referendum. So the principal conditions precedent of us holding a referendum on Section 36 of the Constitution, equalization in the fall of 2021, would be substantial progress in the completion of a coastal pipeline and with repeal of Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act. But if the federal government were wonder of wonders to give us a fair deal on equalization, then that would make it redundant and pointless. But I think the chances of that are about as great as a snowball's chance in hell.
Have you spoken to Mr. Scheer about this referendum and what it might mean if he were to be elected Prime Minister in a few weeks?
I think I may have mentioned this to him. I can't, not recently, but certainly earlier on, I presented to him the key points of our platform. I think he's aware of that.
Premier, what will happen if Justin Trudeau is re-elected when it comes to attracting investment?
Well, what I heard in New York from some of the world's largest investors is that the re-election of a Trudeau government would likely continue the freeze on investment in the Canadian energy sector in particular. These are very sophisticated folks who invest tens of billions of dollars, and they are not, as I heard, prepared to risk additional investment with a federal government that seems openly hostile to energy sector. That's what they said. They said they're tired of a federal government that is attacking the sector which we're asking them to invest in. And they need to see our ability to ship energy, not just to the United States, but to global markets, to increase the price here, to increase the value proposition of investing. And they know what Albertans understand about Liberal policies like the No More Pipelines Law, Bill C-69. They understand what the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association has said, that no major new pipelines will be proposed under that legislation. They hear Prime Minister Trudeau talking about phasing out the oil sands. They look at the proposed cap on oil sands development, and just the posture generally coming from Mr. Trudeau and his Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna. And so what I heard was, you're telling us a good story about what you're doing in Alberta, but give us a call if there's a change in the federal government. Now, look, it's my job, one way or another, to deal with whoever wins the federal election. I will respect, obviously, the outcome and try to work productively with whoever is elected. And we will continue here in Alberta to do everything we can to get job-creating investment back here, but I'm concerned that job will be more difficult if there's a second Trudeau term.
What do you say to Albertans to prepare them for this budget that's coming next month? Because for so many years, and not just under the NDP, but even into the previous progressive conservative governments, they have been so accustomed to budget day being a day when people talk about how much goodies are going out the door, how much spending is being done, how many promises are being made. How do you get that whole change of attitude? What do you tell Albertans to sort of prepare them?
Well, first of all, Rick, I think it's the politicians and not the people who need to change their attitude. I think on this, Albertans are way ahead of their political leaders on the need to bring common sense back to our finances. I helped to start the Canadian Taxpayers Federation here in the early 90s in Alberta, and we had governments that thought they could buy votes by just spending and borrowing more, which ultimately meant higher taxes. That's not what happened at all. I'll remind you, whether it was the Klein government here, the Romano government in Saskatchewan, the Chrétien government in Ottawa, McKenna government in New Brunswick, and on, governments that brought order back to Canada's finances in the 1990s all went on to win larger mandates from the people. Because, Rick, let me be blunt. The people that Ralph Klein used to call severely normal Albertans, the folks who just try to get by and take care of their families and with an ever-rising cost of living, those folks, they understand that you can't spend money you don't have. They understand you can't endlessly go into debt. They get it. But those are not the folks who go to protests in front of the legislature. They're not the ones who issue press releases condemning governments that try to spend responsibly every day. They're not the special interests that get all the media attention, to be blunt with you. So, Rick, you know, I think if you want to know where Albertans stand on the challenge to stop our dive into debt, come with me to a place like the Blackfoot Diner instead of standing in front of the legislature, covering the same usual suspects, holding the same rallies that they've been doing for 25 years. So I think that I don't think the public needs an attitude adjustment. I think the political leadership does, and we'll be judged accordingly. And you know something? I'll go a step further on this. I think the last PC government lost after 45 years, in part because they failed to keep their commitment to a serious plan to get our finances back in order. And I think Albertans were disappointed that government kicked the can down the road yet again. We're not going to make the same mistake.
And since you mentioned former Premier Klein, and you were around then, but many people in your government were not. They can only read about it in the history books. When there are people, thousands, many thousands outside the legislature, and when they are banging on the doors of the legislature, as happened in the early days, actually physically banging on the doors, and when they are shouting names at every occasion, and there's editorials or reporters every day saying that your government is the most heartless, cruel government probably in the history of the Western world.
We all know the script. I could write it in my sleep.
How can Albertans be assured that when you come under fire that, to quote a Ralphism, you ain't gonna blink? But this is more than talk, this is actually walk.
Just watch me. I mean, watch my own record on these issues and judge us based on the actual numbers. I'm not asking people to trust us. I'm not asking them to give us a blank check in terms of public confidence. I'm asking them to judge us, and you know what? We will be judged by this. Barring some global financial catastrophe, if we do not balance the budget by the time of the next election, I would expect many Albertans to hold us to account. And we know that that's our accountability. Our accountability is not to the interest groups that always want more from the taxpayer. Our accountability is not, frankly, to the bankers who are making good money off of the interest payments for the NDP debt. Our accountability is to hardworking Albertans, and they will see that. I think you've seen our finance minister. He is a true blue Albertan. He's a man of great compassion and great thoughtfulness, a professional accountant, but also a cowboy who's run a successful ranching operation. He knows what it is to make some difficult decisions. Let me just offer this caveat. While strong leadership is required and tough decisions do have to be made, and we have to stick with them, this is not a replay of 1993, when they were 18% cuts. As the McKinnon panel said, if we make some difficult decisions now, we can avoid much, much more challenging decisions down the road. So you'll see in this budget a credible path to balance that does not require spending reductions in the scale of the Klein government.
All right, sorry, just before we take one more question from the floor, we're just going to hop over to the phones real quick. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Our first question comes from Laurent Pirot of Radio-Canada France. Your line is open.
Bonjour, merci pour ma question. J'aimerais peut-être une réponse dans les deux langues. Vous avez pris un engagement de ne pas réduire les dépenses en santé et en éducation. Est-ce que ça vaut aussi comme un engagement de ne pas réduire les compensations versées aux infirmières, aux enseignants, aux autres personnels?
Écoutez, on n'a pas pris les décisions finales, mais on a fait un engagement électoral que nous va respecter dans le budget, de ne pas couper les budgets de santé et de l'éducation, du ministère de l'Éducation. Mais ça, c'est 2/3 du budget. Alors, il faut avoir les épargnes dans les économies, dans les autres ministères. Quant au personnel, je crois qu'il faut évidemment, comme la commission McKinnon a dit, trouver les économies dans le coût de la fonction publique, mais autant que possible, j'espère que nous pouvons éviter l'élimination des positions. J'espère que dans la fonction publique elle-même, il y aura les postes les gens, excusez-moi, qui quittent pour le retrait. In other words, in English, as we say, there are people who will leave through attrition. Il y aura l'attrition dans la fonction publique et dans certains postes, nous ne remplacerons pas ces fonctionnaires-là pour réaliser les économies. So I'll just say that we will respect our election commitment not to reduce the budgets of the health and education departments. There will be some savings found within both departments to deal with the cost pressures. So there will be some what we call reprofiling from low priority or wasteful spending in those areas to high priority frontline services for the public. And when you talk about the numbers of people in the public service, we want to minimize any potential layoffs by maximizing attrition. That is to say, when people take their retirement, in some cases in the core public service, they will not be replaced, but you'll have to wait for the budget for details.
A Texas company who's trying to lure away Western Canadian businesses, mostly in the Houston area. They say they've got 40 in the past year and a half alone, about 100 over the past decade or so. That's their claim anyway. And they plan to step up their efforts at this point. What's your reaction to that?
This proves the point I've been making for a couple of years, that we've seen a huge flight of money and jobs to the south of the border from primarily our energy sector to the Texas energy sector. And that's exactly why we are offering a better environment for investment than Texas. Is why we're going forward with the job creation tax cut to reduce business taxes by a third, cutting red tape by a third, bringing balance back to our labor legislation. A lot of those cities in Texas are offering tax holidays for new business investment. We've given our municipalities the power to do the same thing. So my message is, this should underscore that we cannot sit around passively expecting businesses to stay here or come here. We've got to go out and fight for it. And that's exactly why I was in New York City with this message, and it's why I hope in November to be in Houston and Dallas, bringing investment to this province. And you know what? My message, they put up billboards here, they've got advertisements. We'll be doing the same thing. We'll be sending the message to those businesses in Texas that have been fueling the huge growth in the oil and gas sector in the Permian Basin, that they can save on taxes, they can have the most competitive regulatory environment in North America by coming to Alberta. So Texas, it's on.
Switching gears.
He's got a follow-up.
Oh, Jason.
Sorry, this is unrelated. Springbank Dam, there's a petition going around now. I know your government announced a number of 3-4 months ago, I guess now, to try to look at expediting that project. Your reaction to that petition?
We ran on a commitment to get Calgary flood mitigation built as quickly as possible. We kept our word to appoint an expert to figure out what the delays were. It turns out the NDP had failed to submit thousands of documents to the federal federal environmental regulator. We've done that, so nothing can happen until Ottawa approves the project. There are also issues around First Nations consultation, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation has filed an objection. The Springbank affects their traditional lands under Treaty 7, and we need to be respectful of that. So I've met with the chief and some of his councillors. We'll continue to do so. We're going to have to follow this closely because there are alternative proposals. And if it looks like the feds are not going to give approval or there is no timely way to resolve the First Nations objections, then we will have to look at other projects. The bottom line is we need flood mitigation for Calgary. We cannot allow the big flood to happen again.
Those other projects, alternatives, which ones are the UCP?
Well, we're not actively exploring one right now. I just say that I know there are 2 or 3 alternative proposals out there, if the legal barriers to getting Springbank done become insurmountable, rather than waiting for 10 years of endless court litigation over Aboriginal and other objections, then maybe we should have to look at, here's my point, one way or another, we need flood mitigation. I've never been married to one path in particular, but to the principle of flood mitigation.
Is there a timeline in terms of when it would be too far, when you'd be too sick of waiting for regulatory approvals, when you start exploring?
Well, look, if the federal regulator says no, then we're right back to the drawing board. If the courts affirm that this is a violation of the honor of the Crown and the duty to consult First Nations, then we're probably back to the drawing board. So we'll have to call him as we see him.
All right, so we're just on a bit of a
Bill's October 24th to announce a federal, or rather a provincial budget. Did Scheer ask you to wait until after?
No, I think he has more things to worry about than the dates of provincial budgets. This is quite normal. We came to office in May, and we've had to dive deep into the province's finances. We had to wait for the McKinnon report, as promised, which came to us just a couple of weeks ago. This is the same timeline that the NDP had. When they came to office in the spring of 2015, their budget was in October of 2015. If you're responsible, you don't make up a $50 billion budget on the back of a cocktail napkin. You don't guess. You got to do a lot of hard work of analysis of decisions. And that's what I'll be at a cabinet meeting tomorrow in Edmonton, working through some of these difficult decisions. The NDP had an easier time doing budgets because they didn't make difficult decisions. They just spent more and more and more and paid for it with borrowing and higher taxes. We're taking a different approach. We have to make some very careful spending decisions that don't significantly affect frontline services, but do squeeze out waste and inefficiencies. And you cannot do that overnight. So I think we're being absolutely responsible by walking through this carefully and not rushing to a budget for the sake of it. What would the point of that be? This budget will actually be the foundation of a 4-year fiscal plan to eliminate the largest per capita deficit in Canada. Anybody who thinks we could do that in a few weeks doesn't know anything about government budgeting.
So we're just on a bit of a timeline, folks. So if there's one more question, we'll be able to take that.
Actually, Bill, go ahead.
I just wondered your thoughts so far on the federal election campaign and all the controversy. What do you think about that?
Which controversy, Bill?
Well, there's the blackface, of course, just the.
Well, I think it's becoming more clear by the day that we need a new government and a new prime minister. We need a prime minister of whom we can be proud. A prime minister who understands the life of ordinary Canadians, like Andrew Scheer, who grew up in a family where they didn't own a car, in a modest townhouse, who is a person of profound respect, who will never embarrass this country, either here or abroad. I found the revelations about the Prime Minister's penchant for blackface frankly bizarre. He is trying to blame this on society, that we must learn from this. No, Prime Minister, this is about you, not us. I'm 51 years old. I have hardly lived a sheltered existence, and I've never seen anybody ever do that. Insulting racial mockery. I don't know why he's trying to blame society. This is classic. This is typical of him. This is a prime minister who's been found twice now to have broken the ethics law, who fired his attorney general because she refused to give a break to a powerful company facing corruption charges. And this is a prime minister who has inflicted massive economic damage on this province, killing the Northern Gateway Pipeline, killing Energy East, surrendering to a veto on Keystone XL, bungling Trans Mountain, attacking this province prejudicially with his tanker ban. Only one product in one province, bitumen, that's being attacked in that bill, and has brought in the No More Pipelines law, which is a body blow to the future of Alberta's economy. So this is a prime minister, I think, whose record, both personally and in terms of policy, is absolutely clear. And that's why I very much hope that Canadians will opt for a prime minister who is in touch with the lives of ordinary people, who is dignified, who is focused on the cost of living, and who doesn't have to apologize for these kinds of embarrassing incidents in the future. I've got to run now to Blackfoot Crossing, where I will be signing a renewed protocol agreement between the Government of Alberta and the Blackfoot First Nation as further evidence of our government's commitment to the path of reconciliation and partnership with our First Nations people, And so very happy to be doing that as we move forward in our relationships with Alberta Indigenous people. Thank you very much.